Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host of this weekly podcast and dietitian, Jessica Wilson. You can watch this episode on YouTube and Spotify and catch the visuals of the C-SPAN clips. Today, Dr. Natalie Ingram and I discuss RFK Jr.'s Senate committee hearings. In the midst of the news stories and podcasts about RFK, I've been wondering what I can add to the conversation. And I think I got it. RFK Jr. is just Ken. Maybe in his law firm, he was a 10. But in politics, he just won't be Ken enough. Last week, RFK had two back-to-back hearings, one with the Finance Committee Wednesday and the second with the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee Thursday. I watched the first hearing while on the train to San Francisco Wednesday morning. I always try to get a seat by myself, but that morning I ended up at a table of four sitting diagonally from a tech bro. Usually I'm a quiet passenger, but there were many times that morning where I had to stifle a cackle at both RFK's answers and the political theater I was witnessing in real time. Over and over, RFK was asked if he said what he said. Senators would read his quote to him, ask him if he said it, watch him stumble over the answer, and then submit the transcripts as evidence. On the show, we've talked about the podcast bros, and I gotta say the internet really is forever, as the Washington Post proved in their brief cuts of RFK saying what he said and denying what he said.
News reports have claimed that I'm anti-vaccine or anti-industry. I am neither. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective. Vaccines play a critical role in healthcare. All of my kids are vaccinated. What would I do if I could go back in time and I could avoid giving my children the vaccines that I gave them? I would do anything for that.
If your kids were young now, would you give them the measles, the mumps vaccine?
No. I support the measles vaccine. I support the polio vaccine. I will do nothing as HHS secretary that makes it difficult or discourages people from taking either of those vaccines. The polio vaccine contained a virus called simian virus 40, SV40. It's one of the most carcinogenic materials that is known to man. There are lots and lots of studies out there now that show that kids who get measles as a child are much healthier when they grow up.
Did you say that exposure to pesticides causes children to become transgender?
No, I never said that. If you in a lab put atrazine in a tank full of frogs, it will chemically castrate and forcibly feminize every frog in there. There's a lot of other evidence that it's doing it to human beings as well.
Other highlights from day one included Bernie's poster of two onesies available at the Children's Health Defense website, RFK's organization. One said, unvaxxed, unafraid. The other said, no vax, no problem. Additionally, in that first hearing, Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire displayed a giant poster of a pro-abortion statement Kennedy made when he visited New Hampshire on his presidential campaign tour just months ago. The two talked about his shifting views on abortion. By the second hearing, Kennedy just seemed despondent, tired. People didn't seem to have liked him on day one. And he seemed just more willing to moderate his support for vaccines to get the committee to like him. Multiple senators noted his flip-flopping once he shifted his campaign in support for Trump. Most people have forgotten that the Harris campaign blew Kennedy off and wouldn't take a meeting with him. So the obvious next choice was Trump. And this brings me to what I think hasn't been made clear. RFK seems to want the political spotlight that his father and uncle actually earned without doing so himself. Kennedy seems to think that he's a 10 because he wants to address chronic disease in this country, something he repeated an annoying number of times last week. But his idea isn't new. It's not original. Get in line with every major news outlet, health influencer, and grifter. He seems to believe he's special, but the truth is he isn't Ken enough. He's just a guy who helped get Trump elected by pulling in the independents and conspiracy theorists. It's giving sad Ken, conspiracy Ken, charlatan Ken. Becoming a prophet to conspiracy theorists must feel good and would definitely make somebody double down on their unhinged beliefs. Delusional Ken. Dangerous Ken. Over those 2 days, when asked what he would do, his answer is what Trump wanted him to do. One of the senators asked if Kennedy was just a rubber stamp to Trump's agenda and incapable of having an independent thought. And the answer is absolutely yes. Again, he's just Ken. He likely looks in the mirror in the morning and laments to himself that no matter what I do, I'm always number two. No matter how hard he tries to be more than a man behind the tan. He wants Trump to put his manly hand inside his as they ride off into oligarchy. And with that, here's Natalie. Natalie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. I brought you here because you were able to pick out, again, the people of the things last time. And again, I'm wondering if there's anything, or I guess what we can contribute to the conversation. I will say to you, the vote has been scheduled for tomorrow. So for folks who are listening, this is a recap and what we know, and we're going to see if it was effective or not. Okay. Highlights from day one for you.
I mean, the Democrats spent their time at Kinko's and got their poster boards out with it. Which is always entertaining. It did make me miss the congresswoman from California, who was so good at that, the visuals. Highlights. I think the just bold-faced denial and like fun new timeline that he invented around his time in Samoa and what he was doing there and who he met with and what he did was fascinating to watch in real time. Nobody mentioned the bear in the middle of Central Park in New York City.
Nobody mentioned that he may or may not have eaten a dog in.
Yeah, none of the I didn't really expect them to bring that up. But yeah, I think his like lean in hard to like, I'm pro science, I'm pro evidence, I'm not anti-vaccine as being like his big pushback. Because certainly that's what a lot of Democratic senators came armed with was like, are you telling people not to get vaccines?
And by armed with, you mean the Kinko's trip. This is the blog post that you wrote. This is the transcript of what you said.
Yes.
They were prepared.
Yes. I'd like to enter these 100 pages of transcripts from the 50 bro podcasts incel podcasts you've been on where you've said that vaccines are dangerous.
Absolutely.
And that you regret vaccinating your children.
Right.
It's like one of your number one regrets in life. Yeah, and sort of denying so much of what he has written in his books in terms of advice. So, I think I will give the caveat. I haven't watched many or any other really of the confirmation hearings for other cabinet positions. So I'm not super familiar if the conversation about like, can you commit to doing XYZ is like a common question or refrain. I'm like, he has clearly demonstrated he's a man who's willing to say like, yes, I'll do that. Sure. Like, why not? That to climb to where he needs to be in terms of power. But yeah, the weaving in and out of science, of like the backing up of science was probably the most interesting to me in terms of his insistence at being evidence-based, that he just wants gold standard research to be done on things like vaccines, that he wants to push for good science. But I think there's a distinct possibility that his version of good science and my version of good science are quite different. And certainly, as we're seeing now, the version of good science that was happening at NIH and NSF and these other federal agencies that's on a pause, his line was, I serve at the pleasure of the president when asked about any of those things, which on the one hand, true.
What he's supposed to do.
As a cabinet member, I expected him to be like 7% more, like less spineless about it.
7%?
I don't know. Some small percent.
How many times did you hear him say, I believe that President Trump believed that abortion, what was the line?
Every abortion is a tragedy.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't, I was surprised at how often abortion came up.
I was too, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was mostly from the Democrats. Like one of the giant posters that was up there was like a direct quote that was pro-choice that he had said in, I believe it was New Hampshire. And one of my favorite parts too was when whichever senator it was like, oh, I'm so glad that we are on the same page about something. And then it was like abortion. And then that was the point at which somebody was like, how easily are you going to flip flop? Like, like, why should we trust whatever you're saying? Because it's just going to be something different. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Basically. I appreciated that they pointed that out in real time, because I feel like we see that sometimes on like debate stages in politics, but maybe not as much in these kinds of confirmation hearings. Again, maybe this is happening in every confirmation hearing and I'm just not watching it. But yeah, the like, so when you were campaigning mere months ago, you were really focused on bodily autonomy, which is more consistent with your other views of being anti-vaccine, which you are apparently no longer that either. And yeah, bringing up mifepristone again, you know, just like wonky fact checking me was like, well, when you put things over the counter, it changes the rules about what you have to report and don't have to report. Like, I don't report adverse events of when I take Tylenol to my doctor either, because it's an over-the-counter medication. The rules change when it becomes over-the-counter. They just like to leave those parts out. I did appreciate the Democratic senator who was like, I have these 70 studies of the safety of mifepristone. There's over 100 studies of the safety of mifepristone. And yeah, so, you know, I that's their wedge in to making mifepristone unavailable and diminishing abortion nationwide. Like, I get it. That's their playbook in Project 2025. That's the plan. But I was surprised to hear them talk more about it.
So much. The follow-up coverage in the news is consistently anti-vax. He, you know, was being grilled on vaccine stance. And I wouldn't say it was 50-50, but it was a lot of abortion. And that didn't come up in any of the news, the flip-flop on that. And I'm like, that's significant to this argument here. It's not just vax or no vax. That was one that got me. And again, no coverage on it. The science doesn't matter for sure, unless it's science. I agree with 1000%. I really appreciated, we got started on day one with Ron Wyden saying the words quackery, conspiracy theory, and charlatan. I was like, this is going to be more fun than I expected. There have been people who have been confirmed that, you know, senators have not agreed with. This felt like political theater in like a whole different way. Bernie and his onesies from, what is it, the nonprofit children's, it might be Children's Defense Fund, but like having again the Kinkos, we went and we blew up this image. That was amazing. That, and again, I mean, that clip did end up on the news, but so yeah, so the picking and choosing is wild to me. The constant stats were so annoying. So, tell us how you're going to change Medicare. Well, this number, statistics, this and that. Tell us how you're going to change anything. And it's always like these statistics. And I was wondering why. And I'm like, because you have prepared for every bro podcast, right? And so I've had a chance to practice this. And it was like, oh, the lawyer of it all. Yes, this like litigation, you have had to repeat these things over and over to make your point. What do you think of Elizabeth Warren and her?
So that was
moment?
Probably my favorite.
Same.
Because you know, the Republicans kept being like, my colleagues across the aisle are grilling, like they're, you know, taking such a hostile stance. And I appreciated that she, and this is part of her tactic anyway, I think generally, but that she brought a very like, you know, thank you for being here. I'm so happy on, you know, there's like, we agree about the overreach of pharmaceutical industries and need for regulation, which is part of what I talked about in the last episode, is that I'm like, there's so many things of the Make America Healthy Again platform that I think progressives can be on board with. And I think Elizabeth Warren showed the beginning of that. Like, I don't think she was being facetious. I think she was being serious. Like, we agree about the problems of like lobbyists and people trying to make money off of government positions. It was a great example of gaslighting in real time, of him saying like, well, you're telling me that I can't sue big pharma. And she said, that's not what I said. Let me repeat what I said.
So I want to talk more about money. I'm looking at your paperwork right now. In the past 2 years, you've raked in $2.5 million from a law firm called Wisner Baum. You go online, you do commercials to encourage people to sign up with Wisner Baum to join lawsuits against vaccine makers. And for everyone who signs up, you personally get paid. And if they win their case, you get 10% of what they win. So if you bring in somebody who gets $10 million, you walk away with $1 million. Now, you just said that you want the American people to know you can't be bought. Your decisions won't depend on how much money you could make in the future. You won't go to work for a drug company after you leave HHS. But you and I both know there's another way to make money. So, Mr. Kennedy, will you also agree that you won't take any compensation from any lawsuits against drug companies while you are secretary and for 4 years afterwards?
Well, I'll certainly commit to that while I'm secretary. But I do want to clarify something because you're making me sound like a shill. I put together that case. I did the Science Day presentation to the judge on that case to get it into court.
Mr.
The Daubert
Kennedy,
hearing.
Mr. Kennedy, it's just a really simple question.
Yeah,
You've taken in $2.5 million. I want to know if you will commit right now that not only will you not go to work for drug companies, you won't go to work suing the drug companies and taking your rake out of that while you're a secretary and for 4 years after. It's just...
I'll commit to not taking any fees from drug companies while I'm secretary.
No. I'm asking about fees from suing drug companies. Will you agree not to do that?
You're asking me to not sue drug companies,
no,
and I'm not going to agree to that,
drug
Senator.
Companies as much as you want.
I'm not going to agree to not sue drug companies or anybody.
And he seemed to commit to them while he's secretary, but not the 4 years after. And nothing was clear to me that says, I want to put things in place to make me richer after I'm done, which is a classic political story and option. It's why many people want to run for office in the first place, to go to get on boards and be a lobbyist afterward and make obscene amounts of money. I feel like that was the first time I saw somebody be so brazenly open about that being their plan without exactly saying it.
Yeah. And nobody brought up the fact that RFK was criticizing corporations for making money and making money and making money. I'm like, oh, okay. So what you have done is the exact thing that you were telling us that is a problem. You were able to cite all of these statistics because you have made money off of citing these statistics that actually mean nothing. And yes, have let you win arguments. So yes, that was indeed my favorite part, for sure.
And the statistics piece is also interesting because, again, this weaving in and out of trust in science, the belief that statistics is the only type of hard and correct data that we should listen to is part of the larger trust in sort of medical model of science, where hard numbers and facts are purely objective and we should listen to them, even though we know that it is so easy to manipulate statistical data. So it's interesting that that's always people's fallback, no matter kind of what side you are on an issue, is well, I have statistics that prove my point, and the other side can be well, I do too. And
the thing here that got me was that his statistics actually didn't ever prove his point.
No, they weren't having the same conversation.
Right. What are you going to do about XYZ thing? Well, let me tell you about Y, A, and B. And these statistics about chronic disease. How are you going to do this? Well, Donald Trump appointed me to handle chronic diseases. What are you going to do about this completely other related thing? Well, A, B, and C. And did maybe somebody asked specifically why you? And he's like, I am the only one who has promised to who has promised to address chronic diseases. And I'm like, that's what makes you special. First of all, you're not you're creating this identity. You are not special. This is not special. People talk about diabetes all the time. Yeah, you yourself moments ago just railed about how much money we have spent on diabetes treatment and research, but you're going to tackle it different by not spending all that money on it?
what's the plan? Oh, you're gonna supplement us out of diabetes. I understand. Okay. You and Dr. Hyman are gonna come together and fix genetics.
I also believe that no one has ever told him that correlation is not causation.
I believe that someone has told him that, and then he just said, "That's not true."
I don't believe he's ever talked to anybody, and I can't believe that didn't come. Oh, I'm lying. Like, nope. Like, it was clear that folks on the Senate, a few had understanding of medicine, but how did nobody ever say, with the increase in autism has also been an increase in Teslas or an increase in global warming, or like anything? It's like, oh, vaccines and autism.
Yeah, the social constructionist in me with this whole like autism didn't exist when I was a kid, which we talked about in the MA episode too, just makes me want to tear my hair out. But I want you to look me straight in the face, sir, and tell me that your family does not have neurodivergence in it.
Right.
Very famously so. And that just didn't exist when you were growing up. And I want to be like, how many of your family members were lobotomized in the early 20th century because of developmental and like mental differences?
Mm-hmm. Somebody in the second hearing said kids in our day, if they had ADHD, they weren't medicated. They just had the belt. They were just basically like beaten. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to be like the better alternative. We don't need these medications because we knew how to deal with it back then. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I was like, does that explain how you are the person sitting here and saying these things? Because that explains a lot of what's wrong, I feel, with the Gen Xers and Boomers. It's like you were not given any compassion or understanding or empathy, but whatever.
I imagine, especially in a very high pressure family that has a lot of pressure to succeed and be public in that success, but also has a long family history of substance abuse challenges and mental health challenges. Like, that is a lot of pressure on a person. I
also feel like this makes sense because you want to be special in this family. Like, you think you're special because you need yourself to be special and you don't know how to be special. So like this is your opportunity, and it's just not working. Like, you're boring basic Ken. Like, I'm sorry. Also, just let me side note, I also don't believe in science because he has never used sunscreen in his life. That's not a dig.
I just figured maybe he and the president were sharing a tanning facility. They got like a discount code for all the income bros in the administration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. His cousin's letter.
Yes, also. Carolyn Kennedy.
Chef's kiss, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ambassador. Right. I appreciate your work and citations.
Receipts, citations, all of these things.
Yeah. Unrelated to something he said, but something I was surprised by, which maybe again I couldn't have been if I watched more confirmation hearings. I was surprised at how many people wanted to talk to him about rural healthcare.
Medicaid, and yes, because they're constituents
Medicaid too.
Yes, and indigenous community healthcare, Native American. reservations came up as well. And in the second, that was a good follow up. What is Medicare Part A? And he couldn't answer. What is Medicare?
You know the basics of our healthcare system?
What are all of these things? And he was like, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, no. What? Part B. Blah, blah, blah. No, that's not it. So another thing that really got me was like people were asking about specific like research and science, and he couldn't, he didn't know about like bills or things that are going through, and they were like, that's literally your job to come prepared. So what are you coming here with? Was another one. I'm like, oh, you just think you are special. You think you're the one.
Like his law school application where he just wrote his name.
Stop it. I didn't know that.
I haven't seen the fact check, but somebody wrote about that, like compared his uncle's, like JFK's application where he talked about wanting to do good for society, like a typical law school, and that he just wrote his name because he is just entitled to it, and he got in.
And they're into that.
It's entitlement, right? It's like, well, I don't need to know all this. I'll have people to do the actual work. I just want to go be in charge of some stuff and get to be on cameras and then get to make money from these policies that all these like nerds are going to create for me.
Yes. Back to your rural healthcare.
Yeah.
It was a Republican senator, of course, from Montana,
Yeah.
who asked about farmers, and RFK was like, da, 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 our farmers can't even sell to Europe because of all the chemicals and everything that's wrong with the crops that are grown here. And like the senator was very nice and like nodded and was just come around to like, our farmers do sell to Europe, and like didn't necessarily try and help him out, but like didn't seem to care at all that that he was talking shit about his constituents, and was like, do you no, you don't care.
Yeah.
I didn't like that.
Yeah. I was like, first of all, this man has only ever visited a rural area to shoot something. Like, he does not, I would not say is embedded in the culture or causes of rural America as a person from a wealthy, elite East Coast family. But yeah, I was surprised at how often they asked him about very real issues of staffing and, hospitals shutting down and conglomerations. And I think could have actually been an opportunity for him to talk about the problems of corporate conglomerate healthcare that is buying up and then shutting down all these rural hospitals.
Yeah.
Or the problems of, I think it was, again, the Montana senator who was like, 75% of our counties don't have an OBGYN. Why do you think that is, sir? If you enact restrictive legislation that makes their job impossible where they can't take care of their patients. Like, there were such opportunities there that, like, obviously he wasn't going to take advantage of because he wants to get confirmed. And if he pushes back against the Republican senators, he's not going to get confirmed. But again, this, like, the Maha thing of like, you're so close to like getting to be consistent with what you say your morals and your ethics are around bodily autonomy and access to things. And then you just let it fly by for money and power.
Went. Yeah. Like, if I believed you. So actually, let me go back to my conversation with Jeff again. Jeff was right. Like, RFK Jr. does not want this job. I feel like he couldn't even sit for 3 hours without like slouching and slumping into his chair and just like, which,
he needed a cheering section.
Yes. Like at, both times ended up like needing to cough and sneeze. Like he was just tired by the end, which is fine. And this is not a note of ableism, but if I am going to inspire confidence or like my capacity to do a hard job, this is not that, sir. No, you could have taken a stimulant in order to stay with the conversation.
That would involve putting harsh chemicals into his body.
Right. Dang. Okay.
I'm sure that Dr. Hyman could have whipped up a little cocktail for him.
Why did RFK say that he wants to practice radical transparency? You may have missed that, but
no, I for sure saw that. That was one of the softball questions, like, can you commit to being more transparent with the American people? I'm like, transparent with the research studies that none of these people are going to read? Like, what do you mean transparent?
Right. Yeah.
They're not reading the data now. Do you think they're going to read it more in the future? Or like a 400-page budget document? What kind of transparency do you think is missing right now?
Yes.
Because you didn't get your FOIA documents that probably had redacted things because of HIPAA. Like, what? What's not? Okay. But you don't want to be transparent about the money you're making from these lawsuits, but you're going to be transparent about everything else.
Yeah. What? I also definitely understood as not a surprise. He cannot read a research study. We're not surprised. But at some point during day 2, somebody was like, yes, you're very well versed in research studies. And it might have even been Senator Cassidy, who's the doctor, who had serious concerns both day 1 and was chair day 2, and went through so much of his like list of how vaccine specific he was not paying attention or like believing any of the science. And I was just like, how do people not see that he does not know any of like, is it because they don't know how to read a research paper? They don't know that
100%.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that.
How did I just Not that everybody who's a senator needs to be a healthcare provider and understand science.
Oh, yeah. No, that does not guarantee anything. As a person from Oklahoma who had an OBGYN senator for a million years that still spouted off falsehoods about abortion on the Senate floor, very consistent. Do not rest in peace, Jen Memhoff. You know, like, there's no guarantee. Like, med school is not a guarantee of scientific literacy.
Dang.
Unfortunately. I was going to say, at least white dude med school from the 1950s or 60s.
Fair. Day 2 was with the Health Committee. Day 1 was Finance Committee. Not as much abortion, very, very much vaccine. Favorite viral moment from Senator Angela Alsobrooks, who brought up the comment that RFK has made about Black folks and white folks needing a different vaccine schedule. Yes.
You were on a show on February 26, 2021, an interview with Dr. Judy Mikovits, where you said the following, and I quote, "We should not be giving Black people the same vaccine schedule that's given to whites because their immune system is better than ours." Can you please explain what you meant?
There's a series of studies, I think most of them by Poland, that show that to particular antigens that Blacks have a much stronger reaction. There's differences in reaction to different products by different races.
So I have 17 seconds left. Let me just ask you then. So what different vaccine schedule would you say I should have received? What different vaccine schedule should I have received?
I mean, the Poland article suggests that Blacks need fewer antigens than...
This is so dangerous.
So you get the same measles vaccine.
Mr. Kennedy, with all due respect, that is so dangerous. Your voice would be a voice that parents would listen to. That is so dangerous. I will be voting against your nomination because your views are dangerous to our state and to our country.
I mean, do you think science is dangerous, Senator?
So I Googled that. That study was hard to find on the interwebs. Everybody, yes, New York Times and other people had covered that exchange, and they just said, you know, and I looked it up. 83% of the people in that study were white. 85.3%. So it was a broad sample.
Yeah. Very common in clinical research, which is why it's so great that we're doing away with DEI efforts like our clinical research studies racially diverse.
It's great.
Yeah.
That study had the longest discussion section I personally have ever seen.
That's impressive.
Truly have ever seen. Longer than the results section, longer than all of them. And usually it's the results section. I'm like, oh my God, can you just...
It's just so full of limitations?
It was like, well, so we saw this, but...
that sounds right. That's like how actual science works.
Yeah. I was like, clearly there are concerns, and you were saying them. It said multiple variables, including genetic, demographic, immunological, and environmental factors, influence the development and longevity of immune responses after vaccination. Like, that's just one sentence in like paragraphs and paragraphs of this. That doesn't say anything for me. Like that just sounds fine. That's not a conclusion at all.
It sounds like people's bodies vary really widely on how they take up medications.
Right.
Which is why we do extensive research studies on how different populations react to medication.
Demographic, environmental. Oh, shit. There's the thing that I have forgotten to write down. So many opportunities. It was so focused on vaccines and then the poison in our food. There was nothing as an environmental lawyer about the environment. He mentioned asthma a few times. I was like, how have you not mentioned air pollution? How have you not mentioned like where people live? All of these things that should be easy for you if this was actually your topic. So many ways that senators could have been asking about health, about mental health, that just got down to the vaccine. And I'm like, is this just for performance, or do you all not understand? Are you just trying to add to the vaccine conversation? And that was really disappointing to me, and something that I think me, you, other people have been asking for is a more complex conversation about health. And when apparently senators are only getting their information from, like, say, news outlets who are only covering ultra processed foods and red dye number 3 and whatever the things from the examination are saying, this is how we end up here. We could have, it's just, yeah, that's back to the media of it all, because then you're able to get the Maha moms up in arms if you're not talking about things. Do you want to be talking about rural areas where you live and every, say CAFO is having like runoff into your community? Like, that really, really bothered me, because that, again, I was like, this is a direct line to like media and what they're choosing to cover for me.
Yeah. I don't want to downplay that. Like, it's certainly important to grill him about his position on vaccines. Vaccines are the greatest, if not like one of the greatest medical interventions of the 19th and 20th century, right?
Antibiotics.
It's the reason we have moved, from infectious disease to killing people to chronic disease killing people, is because we got vaccines, right? I do think there were a lot of missed opportunities to talk about, to be like, well, you've been a great champion for climate change activism and, diversifying our energy. And, President Trump's policies are not planning to do that. He's more a drill, baby, drill vibe. Like, what would you do in those situations? Right. It's certainly from the health committee to talk about environmental racism. I mean, I don't know if they would use that phrase.
Bernie didn't even use the phrase at all. It was so... he had an opportunity. He did say, and like hammered in on something that was silly, which was like, if you believe in health and healthcare, will you commit to universal healthcare for all?
I did. Yeah, I remember that question.
Second day, that was like the big yelling back and forth. And I was like, knock it off. Why don't you say so many other things here and say, yes, do you believe in global warming? Maybe that's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if it's just like vaccines are the like sexier, more polarizing political issue for people. And so the senators think like that needs to be my focus, which is a fascinating choice, like a week after devastating wildfires that were climate change caused. And, after like horrible flooding and hurricanes, like, it's an interesting choice just to leave that entirely out of the conversation. And maybe that's because in the purging of DHHS, they're no longer going to be thinking about climate change as a health issue. So like, why talk about it if we're just going to ignore it anyway? But yeah, it does, if nothing else, than to demonstrate like, so your career has been built on critiquing big pharma and climate change. Like, why didn't you pursue a Department of Energy position, or like something that more aligned with your, although I guess his more recent stuff has been more health focused.
And by recent, you mean since August or July? Recent, like year. It was, yeah.
I mean, he's been consistently anti-vax.
I mean, I don't think that's hell. Sorry. Those are, yes, conspiracy theories regarding health. But like, yeah.
He did, like, he was like, I think one of the Republican senators gave him kind of a softball question about like, are you a conspiracy theorist? Yes. And like, well, they called me a conspiracy theorist, and now we see that red dye number 3 is banned. And I'm like, yeah, bro. How many days into the new administration? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, he got credit for it day 2. And I'm like, that you don't know how to do research. You don't understand how influence is working. With the few minutes I have you, predictions for tomorrow.
Oh, I totally think it's going to be confirmed.
You think so?
Given the spinelessness of the other confirmations from the Democratic Party and the willingness to push back, I don't really. If they didn't push back in Hegseth,
yes,
like a no.
Didn't we just need like one more person? Because Mitch McConnell was a no, Susan Collins was a no, Lisa Murkowski was a no. And
I mean, maybe this is the guy who like pushes them. This is their like one person that they're going to say no to.
Yeah.
I mean, I can hold out hope, but I'm like, who are they going to put forward next, and how much worse are they going to be?
That is exactly what I was asking somebody. Oh!
I mean, they can find somebody worse.
Yeah, like
they can
super
find
duper anti-trans. Like, there's just an open door for so many people.
I'm
worse.
Like, at least he has flip-flopped for more progressive. So the more progressive ethics might be hiding in there somewhere. They can find somebody who never even sniffed at a more progressive opinion about gender-affirming care or, vaccines or anything like that. So, they could hire, I don't even know. Skeptical me is like, oh, they're just going to confirm everyone because they don't have the pushback to say no.
Yeah. And any of us are pushing back. Well, not any of us, but most people pushing back are in blue states already.
Yeah.
Contact your senators. Yeah, I don't need to.
Yeah. I mean, I still am.
Good for you.
Well, I have freaking Schumer. So somebody needs to be like, and Gillibrand has been confirming people too, like voting yes. I don't know how she's going to vote. She hasn't, I think, announced how she might vote in this particular position. But, I got Schumer to call repeatedly and be like, what are you doing? When you put out these statements about like, somebody should do something about this nonsense. I'm like, you are the someone, sir. Yeah. Turns out. You were the someones.
I think Cory Booker might abstain. There's mine too. Yep. So yes, you're right. I'm like, with that math, Cassidy really truly might vote against. Like, he was not having it.
Yeah, there were a couple of Republicans who I'm like, you're asking the questions your majority leader has asked you to ask, but you don't look excited about it.
Yeah. So if he's not going to run again, I say I say because he was saying, my colleagues are texting me, my friends are texting me, very concerned. So if he is looking to like save some sort of face in the medical community, he might vote no. But yes, I am very worried if he is not confirmed who we will get next.
Yeah. There's always somebody worse waiting in the wings with the administration. Like, there's always Stephen Miller hiding in the corner, ready to be the worst person you can imagine.
Right. So this is where we are. And I think it matters. It's not just like everything is doom and gloom. I will be back here, but it is just so interesting to me to see the how of how we got here. The week after this airs, I'm going to be replaying, depending on how the vote goes, I'll be replaying the interview with Jeff Hutt and just like reminding people that this is not about health. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on the show. Maybe I'll ask you for a voice memo response to the phone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm sure.
I bet somebody...
I mean, my thoughts might just be... but I can make some like grunting upset noises into the voice note.
All right, friend. I appreciate you as always. Thank you for talking to me about
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. After Natalie and I recorded our interview, the Finance Committee voted to advance RFK Jr.'s nomination for HHS in a party line vote, and we got to see how Senator Cassidy of Louisiana crumbled and was willing to put aside all of his training, his beliefs, and facts just to get reelected in 2026. We'll be keeping an eye out for the full Senate vote and see if Kennedy is Ken enough for all of them. We'll be back next week, and in the meantime, make it awkward again in 2025 and find joy where you can. You can support the show by joining the Patreon, leaving a comment on Spotify or YouTube, or a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll bring my dad back to the show to read them. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson. This show is edited by Jen Jacobs, who is indeed Ken enough, and supported by Patreon members in the legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services.